Well, thank you again, Rachel, for coming on my podcast. I'm so excited. Like, this is beyond. Okay, I have to calm down because we're here to serve the people. All right. So, because the name of my podcast is How to Stop Fighting with Your Son, it really is coming from when I had my oldest son, we butted heads a lot because he's so much like me.
Mm-hmm.
So I went on a journey of kind of like bettering that relationship, but which came to me bettering my relationship with myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so I wanted to hear your perspective on how you approach your relationships with your sons, and you have 5. And so I wonder if you've had such a relationship with one of them or any of them, and how you stop fighting with them, and how you have a good relationship with them.
Yeah, it can be a challenge, especially in different times with different kids. Like if they go through a season where they've got some stuff going on, I really do have to learn to be at peace. I mean, I've been going through this phase lately where, sometimes I think I get so uptight about every little thing, and I see everything that each one of my kids is doing as almost like a reflection of where they're going to be 10 years from now. If you don't do this right in this minute, you're guaranteed that things aren't going to go well. And so I start to, I think, operate under a lot of discouragement and pressure, even when in general my kids are all doing great. It's just they're humans, and so there's always human challenges. And I really do have to work to have a bigger picture and a bigger perspective. And I also do have to remember, I have to remind myself sometimes, that my children are not, my boys, they're not like mini versions of me. They're not made in the image of Rachel. They're made in the image of God, And so for me, as a Catholic, as a Christian, I try to see a lot of this through a spiritual vein of, like, God loves my kid. Hold on just a sec. I'm sorry. Can you
No
edit
problem.
that?
Yeah,
Okay.
no problem. No
Okay.
problem. Yeah, no problem.
And that's me yelling at one of my kids. Sorry.
Perfect.
Okay. Let me make sure.
And I totally forgot to have you introduce yourself. Of course.
Okay. Well, good. We could do that too.
Okay.
We could go back and do that?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Because you can do all these
Yeah,
edits, right?
we're easy, yeah.
Okay. So for me, I have to remember, that my kids are made in the image of God and likeness of God, and that they're their own individuals. But that can be really hard because, we are, like, I'm me, and I have my set and the way I see the world, and the way, of course I want to train my kids in the right way and the way they should go, and teach them truth and teach them goodness and, rules that they have to follow, like we want them to obey the law, that sort of thing. But then when it comes to certain specific things, I have to learn, and I'm learning that there are going to be a lot of things where it's like they're their own person, and so it's really, I have a friend who calls it, knowing which hill you want to die on. And it's like, okay, how many battles do you want to have? How many battles do you plan to win? You're not going to win them all. So you have to pick the battles that you want to fight. And I really just have to keep that in check. Some battles are absolutely worth fighting, and some battles are not. I remember years ago when my son Elliot, who is now 22, he was little. He was like 8, and we were at the store buying clothes, and he found this sweatshirt with a big skull on it, and he wanted this sweatshirt, and I was like, no way, you're not getting this sweatshirt. We don't wear those kind of clothes. Was it a bad thing? No, it wasn't. But in my mind, I'm like, well, if I let him wear this, the next thing I know, he's going to X, Y, and Z, and we're going to be off on some path. I mean, he pitched a fit that day at the store, and then he would calm down, and then he'd be mad again, and in some ways I didn't handle it right because I should have just left the store with him. He was like standing, and I had the four boys who were all about the same age, and he was like zooming across, and then he'd come back, and he was just like so mad. He might have even been younger than 8. But it was just like in my mind, like, absolutely not. Like, for me at that stage of their life, clothing was absolutely a hill I was willing to die on in certain areas, And I think that just like as women, as the moms of these boys, we just have to know what's worth fighting
Yeah.
for and over and arguing about. And then I rely so much on my husband because he keeps so many things in perspective for me
Mm.
of just, like, is this something we should be concerned about? Is this something we need to be willing to let go? And always just trying to find that balance.
Yeah, if it and I like how you said you have to really manage your mind about not projecting this into their future
That's right.
and just like keep perspective. Yeah, I
Yeah,
love
and
that.
it can be scary because sometimes it absolutely is something you have to deal with right then. Like,
Hmm.
it's a little thing perhaps, but if you don't make it a big deal right now, then
Yeah,
little by little it's a big thing, and
yeah,
so it's like we're dealing with things with my 13-year-old son, who's now the youngest of the boys.
yeah.
And something happened the other day where if it had been one of the big boys, we wouldn't have even thought twice about it, but because
Mm.
he's 13 and he's at this age, absolutely, I'm going to come down hard on you because
Hmm.
we have to deal with this behavior right now,
Right.
like, because
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with this behavior 5 years from now
Right.
when it's like this instead of like this.
Hmm. Hmm. And I imagine with you having now an adult son, right, 22.
Yeah,
You,
and multiples of them because I have our oldest just turned 24. So 24 and
oh,
22, 20 and 18, and
oh
then
my
13, and then
gosh.
Isabel's 10. Yeah, so we're
Oh
like
my
all over the
gosh.
place. Yeah,
Yeah. Wow. I am amazed. And yeah, so with having them all so grown up, you have to lean into their own people, right?
that's right.
And
Yeah,
so and it's easier to start earlier for us to practice that, right?
that's right. I
'Cause-
think knowing what your expectations are, knowing what's important to you as the parents,
Mhm,
and really working hard to establish that these are the
mhm.
things that we're going to deal with. This is the kind of
Yeah,
behavior that's not acceptable. This is the stuff that is less problematic, perhaps. And then, because it's so true, as they get bigger, the consequences for behavior is on them. And
mhm.
so it's like we're still helping our boys and encouraging them and guiding them.
Yeah,
I mean, my husband really tries to, for me as the mom, I definitely make those connections and check on my boys and have conversations. But I think it's really important for my husband to like sit down and have lunch with the boys one-on-one and talk, how are you doing? Where are
yeah,
you going? None of them have launched yet. They're all in college still. So it's like they're all still just,
yeah.
I feel like we're kind of like this, the bumpers in bowling, and we're just there to kind of like keep
You're
moving you forward.
you're still guiding them, right? Even if
That's
they're
right.
24.
That's right. Yeah. But
Yeah.
again, so much of it is their decisions, but you're trying to
Mhm,
figure out how much feedback you need to give in a
mhm.
way that is good, they can hear without, the way I talk to my 13-year-old is not the way I'm going to talk to those bigger guys.
Right.
So,
And that's what I'm learning now. And my oldest is 9, and then I
mhm.
have a 7-year-old, and I have twins who are 4.5. So I'm just learning to even tell them, what I say to the 4-year-olds doesn't apply to you. It's not
Right.
equal ground. So I'm
Yeah.
I'm coming to that wisdom. Yeah. So it
Yeah,
helps.
and it's really interesting because I think you learn once you have even just your second child how
Yes.
it's not a carbon copy. Like we had our son Ethan, and then 21 months later we had Elliot, and I was like, oh, good, I've got this figured out because I just had
Yeah.
a boy like less than 2 years ago. Totally different
No.
personality, and that's been the case with each of the kids.
Yeah.
Some are more similar than some other ones,
Yes.
and in general. But I mean, I remember finding that like with one or two of the boys' personalities, you literally have to set fire to something to get their attention. And
Yes.
with some, who have a little bit more gentle personality, like I
Hmm.
remember one time kind of yelling at one of the other boys who was not somebody that needed to be yelled at, and it hurt. Like I could see by the
Yeah.
look on his face that was too
Yeah.
strong for him.
Totally. I am totally learning that. Yeah, actually, that's when I found your book when I had my second son. I was like, oh my gosh, raising boys. So I literally went on Amazon and I ordered 10 books, and one of them was yours. And like it stood out so much than from the other ones. And I remember like I gulped it up and I went on the back of the book and I'm like, oh my gosh, she has a blog. And so I went on your blog, and you reading your blog, it was like late at night. Each night I would read your blog, and it really like it would save me, and just how you went through those years with little
Oh,
boys.
awesome.
So I feel so close to you already.
That's so sweet. Well, I love it because, that when I started that blog, I had my son Augie was a couple of years old at that point. So it was like my fourth boy in
Right.
5 years. And life was like not what I thought it was going to look like as a mom, like all
Right.
these little boys. I'm like, this is not what I envisioned things looking like. And I kind of started to feel like I have to write so that I either cry at the end of the day or laugh at the end of the day. And I would rather laugh more often than not. And so it was so
Yeah.
awesome because once I started, I did find this community of women who were in the similar boat as me. And so, once I knew I wasn't alone, I kind of had the bravery to just share, as
Yeah.
much as you can share when you're a mom. You can't say all the things.
I
But
know.
enough
Now
of
I
it.
wish you would share more with the teenagers, which I know we can't, right? It's like
10 years from now, I'll write that book. Once, it's like once we're
I
through
can't
that.
wait because that's when I will have teenagers. Yeah.
Perfect. Hopefully it'll be there for you.
That's so awesome. Yes, it's so therapeutic. I remember reading that. Yeah, so that's actually one of my like questions that I wanted to ask you. How do you make it so much fun? Like, because you are so good at that, and does it come naturally to you, or did you have to work on that?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I have to make a choice to be to find the humor in things, because I can be turbo fun and crazy, and I can be turbo intense, and so I don't want to say I even try to find a balance in it, because I like to have fun and to really like live life, and
Yeah.
that is my personality. I am wild and crazy. But the thing I have to work to temper more, I think, is when I get really fixated on the things I'm worried about,
Right.
with any one of my children. I mean, it's so great. I think that just today, I had to have a phone call from a good friend, just giving me a little bit of feedback about some stuff that, one of my younger kids had done. And, I found myself like ruminating, oh no, just thoughts of negative thoughts and fears and worries. And it's like, I have to choose to kind of like shut that. I just have to say, I'm sorry, anxiety. I'm sorry, fear.
Yes.
Like, you're not welcome here. I totally read this in an Elizabeth Gilbert book, the Eat, Pray, Love, but she had the big
Yes.
magic.
Yes,
And
I
there was a
love
lot
this.
about that book that I thought was a little bit weird, and a lot that I loved about it. But one of the things that stood out to me was she said, and it was her creative process, but I think it totally applies to women, to moms, is to kind of say, hi, fear, I see you.
Yes.
You're here. I can't necessarily make you go away, but you don't get to make decisions, and you don't get to say so.
Yes.
And that was so freeing for me, because I think for a long time I wanted fear and anxiety to just completely disappear. And instead it has to be more like, yeah, I know you're just a part of the scene, but I just have to be like, there you are, but you don't get to say so.
Yes.
Sometimes it's just a choice. I mean, it can be really hard because, when for me, if I overthink it and I start to feel like so much is riding on every mom decision that I make every day. And again, for me, that's where I kind of get to where, okay, God, you've got this, you're in control here, and really learning to trust that.
Yes. No, I love that, because this is actually what I do as a life coach. I help people see, oh, right, that's fear. I see you, fear, and this is what I'm going to focus on, or whatever the thought is, whatever that feeling is. So I love you saying that, because my clients and everyone listening, they will, it's just, that's why I love everything that you say is just, it's the truth of life. So anyway,
awesome. Thank you.
I just can't. Anyway, okay. So that's great. I love hearing that. And so I have another question regarding your book. So I was just reading the Overcommitted book. So in that book, right, the one message that stood out to me that I feel like I have just went through the last couple of months is, whatever problem you have, if you have that overcommitted, overwhelmed problem, or even anything else, right? The answer is like the way you word it is to let Jesus into your life, right? And invite him into whatever you're going through. And to me, I just kind of name it in a different way, right? Just say universe or energy or the voice within. And so I kind of just went through that, and which was super painful, right? Just to have to, okay, this hurts. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to look inward. And I'm going to sit there and just access that wisdom.
Mhm. Mhm.
But yeah, so I went through that, and when I read your book, I'm like, this is exactly like speaking about my life and how I just went through that. But I guess the question that sometimes I have is, how do you know which voice you're hearing? Is it your brain's voice or your Jesus or Christ or the universe?
Yeah. I think the thing I always consider, a couple of things. I know that the more I am very committed to regular time, for me, I call it contemplation. I mean, and I've started telling people this, but during quarantine, I created a chapel in my closet, a walk-in closet. I don't think my kids know it's there, but I really was like, I feel like I can't stop the hamster in my brain. And so I'll go in there, I'll set my timer for 20 minutes. I light a small candle in there. I make sure it's not by any, hanging
Yeah,
clothes or anything.
clothing. That's safe. Yeah.
And I just quiet myself, and I stop thinking, and I stop, and I don't just open myself up to whatever, but I really just ask God to let me, feel his presence, or to feel his love. Or some days it works better than others, but the key for me is that quiet time. And I
Mhm.
know, when we get back to the idea of prayer, there are so many different ways you can tackle prayer. And like you're saying, for you call, the higher being a different name perhaps.
Yeah.
But this idea that we are aware that we are not the center of the universe, that there is something bigger than us, right?
Yeah.
And that we quiet ourselves so that our brain has time to really know what's most important. And so, for starters, when I'm in the habit, and I fight for it now because I've seen the fruit in my life of when I'm
Mhm.
doing that regularly, there's so much more peace and there's so much more wisdom. And so I
Yes.
think I'm kind of getting around to the answer to your question, which is, when I spend that time in quiet, I don't even feel like I have to like say, is that, I just
Mm.
seem to have the wisdom that I need. But two, I always look at the fruit in
Mhm.
decisions. And I think that's kind of God's built-in feedback for us. Is
Mm.
sometimes we act in faith, we just do the thing because it seems like the right thing. And we trust that it's the right thing. And then we see what the fruit is. And the more we're in the
Yeah.
habit of, I think, and I talk about this in the book, doing things for the right reason,
Mhm.
like I realized for a long time I was making decisions to feed my ego. And so I said yes to things because I wanted to be a person that did X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was because I was coming out of a season of being a stay-at-home mom with a lot of kids, and I was just really loving my mobility. And so I loved being a person that was doing the following things. Well, the fruit in my life was really bad. So then I looked
Mhm.
to, I was saying yes for not evil reasons. It wasn't
Yeah.
evil,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it was just like like I was trying to boost my own ego. And it's like, that's fine, but there's going to be a price to pay for
Yeah.
acting in a way that you might not really have the time or energy to do this, and you're saying yes because of how you want it to look or how you want to
Yeah.
seem. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and so no, that's a really actually great way to look at that. Like, what's the fruit that
Yes.
comes out? And I think sometimes it's not even the actual results, right? Maybe it's just how you feel. The result, the fruit is the how you feel throughout the decision, right? Or
Yeah.
as opposed to like it, right?
Yeah,
What do you
the
think?
fruit is how you feel in the midst of it.
Hmm.
Although, sometimes we wrestle with things, like we really do wrestle with a decision. And so just because you're wrestling with something doesn't mean that it's automatically bad. But the
Hmm.
fruit of the decision, you should feel great peace.
Yeah.
Um, and if you continue to feel like you're wrestling, then you might have to revisit that decision, And then I
Hmm.
do think that there are some ways that you can kind of build um, buffers for yourself. Like for me, one thing I've learned is that instead of saying yes when I get asked to do something, is I'm trying to learn to say, let me talk to Paul, or let me think about it. My husband does not tell me what to do, but he is graciously being the fall guy for me. Let me
Yes.
just, and then and I will talk things through with him, but then it buys me time, because I think
Hmm.
I like in the moment to say yes, because the look on people's face when you say yes,
So great.
they're
Yeah.
so happy. Yeah. So, it's kind of
Yeah.
learning that. Yeah.
I love that. I think I learned that from you and from my mom. She would always say, "Let me check with dad." Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
And it does. Yeah, it gives you that time and perspective and just to consider all things. I
That's
love
right.
that. So actually, let's transition to my other question about the husband.
Okay.
I've learned this from you. I remember, I don't know where you said that you have to have an order of things. God probably first, right? Then you, then husband, and then the kids, right?
Yes.
But that like that space between you and the husband, he has to come before the kids,
Yes.
which we all struggle with so much.
Absolutely. And I think people, that can be a hard thing to hear because it sounds like I'm being a bad mom, but I'm telling you, kids have a way of making themselves first anyway. So even if you are putting several other things ahead of them, and I
Yeah.
don't mean like job, there are other things where that can be out of order, but I mean the spouse comes first.
Yeah.
And because that's never going to mean that, I go out on date night 5 nights a week while
No,
I throw
no.
the kids a frozen pizza. Right. So, but like giving my mental energy
Mm-hmm.
to my husband before I give it to the kids, because the reality is when I make my husband an effort, then he's on par with the kids. The kids are already up here. So, I mean,
You
that's
basically
just
just don't let them fall. Yeah.
that's right. And so then it's really just a matter of bringing your husband up to where you've got the kids, because their lives our life is so much about their lives, getting them where they need to go,
Yeah.
getting them what they need. We love them so much that's a no-brainer,
Yeah.
but really like looking at your schedule and carving out that time. And for Paul and I now, date night comes a lot easier because we can just leave the house. We don't even have to find a babysitter necessarily.
Yeah.
Not that it's that easy, but it's just different. But when
Yeah.
when the boys were little, it was really that whole like putting them to bed and making an intentional time, like sitting on the couch together,
Mm-hmm.
and just being mindful of that. And then the other thing is, I think, just even how we treat our spouse. Like Paul and I talk to engaged encounter groups at our Catholic church, and one of the things he always says, is if I can get up every day and look at my wife and say, how can I make her life better today?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then that can change the whole world.
Oh.
If my attitude is not like what's in it for me, but what does
Mm-hmm.
my husband need today? And really just not in a self-sacrificial of like, I'm a martyr, but just, I'm thinking of your needs. And like the other day Paul and I were making the bed in the morning, and I just, had this thought to thank him for, he took all the trash out the night before. That's a given. Like that's one of his jobs. But for me, it was almost just like a little moment of, isn't it nice when we have moments of grace where we're aware of all the good things that our spouse does, and we think to thank them. Something as simple as that, I think, instead of, I went through this long phase when I was not doing well in life, where when we made the bed in the morning, I would just basically tell Paul all the things I was agitated about, all the people who were getting on my nerves, all the, instead of, I'm just so grateful for you. Thank you for doing that thing, So I think that makes a big difference,
I love that message so much. Again, like I remember reading that from you, and that changed my relationship with my husband, because it felt so
Awesome.
much better for me
Yeah.
to begin with, to like, I felt like I gained my husband back. I was like, right?
Yes.
I have a husband. I want a
Yeah.
husband,
Yes.
So it's like the antidote to resentment. And
Yes. And I think that, and I don't know if I've written about this. I think I have, but I know I've talked about it at different retreats, even just our mentality with, about our husbands, and then how we talk about them with our friends, because I think there's such, this attitude in the culture of like making fun of him, does he ever remember, does he always do, guys always leave the toilet seat up, they leave a mess behind.
yeah.
And, you can get in this habit of almost like talking with your friends about all the stupid stuff your husband's done, instead of having just this attitude of I'm just grateful for this. And it doesn't mean you have to be fake. And it definitely doesn't mean, like, I very much believe that every woman should have some kind of mentor, a person who's older. I think older because it's somebody who's been through it, who kind of helps you keep things in perspective and tell you, kind of like the same with dealing with your kids. What's worth fretting about? What's something there are couples that should be in therapy, and you need to hear that, if or no, this is the common thing and you'll get through it, or
Mm-hmm.
or change your attitude about this. You're the one, you're the
Yeah.
problem here. I think that
Yeah.
that's just, but a wise person
Useful.
who gives positive feedback instead of just like a gripe session.
Yes, yes. I love that. And are you talking about having someone else in your life, or you're having your husband be that?
No, I think if you're able, having a woman who is like a
Oh, a woman.
mentor. I just think that, like, for me,
Yeah.
my husband does that with the boys. Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
some of the things I think about when we're talking about our boys and as they get older, he has great perspective on that. But for a lot of years, I met with somebody who just would talk with me practically. And I mean, for years, it was my mom,
Hmm.
and I think if you have but not everybody has a great relationship with their mom, or necessarily grew up with a mom who has the kind of wisdom
Yeah.
that you would need. But really, just if you're able to find somebody like
Yeah.
that, and it doesn't have to be some big official, we meet once a month or anything like that, but
Hmm.
somebody who you can call, who has wisdom and who will speak truth to you
Yeah.
when you need to hear it, and not just tell you what you want to hear, or
Yeah.
just feed a complaining thing. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. My mom does that for me. So
awesome.
I
That's
love
great.
that. And I mean, you with your blog did that for me, because my mom doesn't have 4 kids, 4 little boys. So she had
Yeah,
2 boy and a girl, and it was all peaceful.
totally different. Yeah.
So I appreciated that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that I love that message about really thinking about your relationship with the husband in such a more intentional, purposeful way,
Yes.
and choosing to think of him, what you can do for him. Love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have another question. It really helped me to hear you talk about seasons and vocation. And I don't hear, maybe because I'm not Catholic, and
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
hear that a lot. So I actually wanted my people to hear you talk about that, about how those two, and how you use them, like how you,
Okay, sure. So
yeah.
for me, I really see this, we use this term vocation, to mean, the thing that God has called me to within my life, that I see as the thing that's helping me to grow in holiness, to be more like a saint. And I mean, like, God calls some men to be priests and some women to be nuns, and they have a vocation to the religious life or to the holy orders. And so for a
Hmm.
long time, I just kind of thought, well, I'm just a person that doesn't have a vocation. But
Hmm.
there is this call to marriage. The vocation to marriage means, like, God is using your marriage, one, to make the world a better place. A strong marriage just changes the world,
Hmm.
and the vocation of motherhood. And so I see these things as I call it my main gig. It's the main thing I've got
Yeah.
going on. Even if and this isn't a conversation about whether women should work outside the home. And I feel like that conversation has been distorted. Maybe
Hmm.
it's settling down, but for years it was these mommy wars of, like, you either stay home or you work outside the home. And it was like, we can still talk about being wives and mothers without it being whether you work outside the home or not.
Yes, I would
So
love to
what
talk
I'm
about that next. Let's save that.
Okay.
Yes.
And so, like, my story is different in that I was able to stay home, and I have friends who work because they want to. I have friends who work because they have to.
Hmm.
I was actually a woman. I felt like I would have liked to work outside the home, but with 4 boys in 5 years,
Yeah.
like, the childcare alone would never have been offset by what I would make being a reporter at the local newspaper. So it was like just not worth it.
Hmm.
And I worked when my oldest son was born. And then after a few months, at really a few weeks, I was just like, I just want to be home with him. And so
Yeah.
there was a lot about that season that was hard, but I think ultimately I did know that that's what I was supposed to be doing. That is
Hmm.
not to say that God just kind of is like, the minute you have a baby, that's the
Hmm.
only thing you should be doing. So this is not what I'm talking about. But what I mean is really this understanding. The concept of vocation is, you're looking at, like, for me, I look at my role as being a wife and a mother as the most important thing I have going on, which
Hmm.
means that it gets my main energy. That doesn't mean
Hmm.
it gets all the energy, or maybe even most of the energy. But what I wrote about in the Overcommitted book, or maybe it was Make My Life Simple, was what I realized was that the job that I had taken on was getting all my positive energy. And I
Hmm.
would come home and I would crash on the couch and I was exhausted. The fruit in my life
Yeah.
was not good. And
Hmm.
fast forward 5 years, and now I'm working full time as a college professor. and Paul's like, the fruit in your life is totally different. You know, it's a different season in our family life, but also whatever it is about that experience, like it's less emotional. I'm teaching things that are in my wheelhouse. I'm energized by this. There's a lot of differences. And so the point wasn't really Rachel just can't handle working outside the home. It was, I was just not where I was supposed to be. And it was a difficult thing because it was a really good place that I was. And there are a lot of really good people who work there. And so it was one of those like, well, why shouldn't I be here?
This doesn't make sense for my brain. Yeah.
That's right. It took me a long time to kind of make peace with the fact that was like, for whatever reason, that was not where I was supposed to be. And it was nothing about the place, the people, anything other than that's just not where I was supposed to be because the fruit was not good. Right. And part of how I started to discern that was that I realized that the effect it was having on my husband and children and my ability to care for them was totally impacted. And then that gets back to this idea of vocation. You know, they are the thing that's most important in my life. And I don't just say that as an emotional thing, but again, as a vocation, it's the thing God has put in my life that's drawing me closer to him. You know, and learning to love my spouse more than I love myself, learning to be patient and kind with my kids, and all that personal growth that happens when you learn to die to yourself and love others more. To me, as a Catholic, I call that growing in holiness, you know, in whatever what you say as a life coach, personal growth.
I mean,
you know?
that's exactly what you just said. Everything. You know, to love them, you have to be able to love yourself. So you start with yourself, and then
that's right.
How can you love them more better? Yeah.
And I love that because I know we're getting a little off topic here, but you know, so much of the happiness that I'm experiencing in life in the last few years is a direct result of time in prayer. And for me, that kind of contemplative prayer that you're talking about, loving yourself. And so the way I sort of articulate that is I sit in the quiet and I don't focus on all the bad things in my life or hurts and wounds, but I'm learning that when I become aware of something that pinches, you know, or a wound that I have, is that I really just want to let Jesus get as deep into that wound as he can. And so like, whatever that love is, whatever the words you want to use for it, that like that stuff can be healed. Sometimes it takes therapy. Sometimes it takes, you know, talking it through with different people to kind of understand things. But ultimately, all these different pockets deep within us are things that God, he just wants to climb down there in there with us. And the more we're kind of, you know, and I think too, when you get that self-awareness of, you know, that idea of hurt people. Like instead of walking around being so ticked off at all the obnoxious people in the world, that I start to recognize it's my own wounds that are getting pinched and rubbed here. Not that the world, you know, like for years, I would have a couple of people that just, the interaction felt very painful, you know, and I think we all have those people. And I finally was like, Lord, I can't live this way anymore. It's somebody I can't escape from. It's somebody who I know is a good person, but why is this so painful? I don't know that I ever got to the bottom line of why it was painful. And I think I spent too many years trying to figure out why I was agitated. And I finally was just like, please heal this. I don't know what it is. And God totally did that for me, you know, but it was just this willingness to say, look, this is how I was clinging so tight, and I had to just kind of be like, just take this, because I don't like living this way anymore, you know. And I think we all have so many of those areas, but the more we get in the habit of just releasing them, whatever it takes to do that, we just find a lot of joy in our lives.
Yeah. I love that. I'm learning that from you, like offer it up to him. I think I would be a very good Catholic if I was born into it.
I think you would. I bet you can do it. It's not too late.
Yeah, because I'm like, it all makes sense. So, but it's so interesting for me to see how, coming not from Catholic world, I was gripping onto it myself. So I'm like, I have to solve it myself. And it was suffocating and gripping and not producing any good fruit.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, the answer, I was like, finally gave up, exhausted myself. I'm like, okay, fine, here.
Yes. And it's so freeing. I'll tell you a quick story about that. I came across this old book, and you've probably are familiar with it because I think I've written about it several times, but there's this Catholic writer named Henry Nouwen, and he was a priest from Belgium. And I
Mhm.
think he died in the 90s, but he had this book from the 70s that a neighbor gave to me, this black and white book about prayer. And
Mhm.
it's called With Open Hands. And the
Mhm.
opening part has this story about an old woman who she had to be removed from her home. And he's kind of a poet, so he writes it so much more beautifully than I'm going to tell you. But they bring her into the emergency room or to the hospital, and they need to take her things because she can't have them. And she's gripping so tight, so tight. And she, they have to pry her hands open, and she's holding on to this penny, this coin in her
Mhm.
hand that she thinks is so important.
Mhm.
And when she finally is able to just open her hands, they take this thing, which is nothing anyway,
Mhm.
right? And it seemed
Mhm.
so important to her. And it just, that willingness to release the things that we hold on to
Yeah.
so tight. And that when we can trust, I think it takes a lot of trust. We have to trust that
Yes.
God, that
Yes.
he loves us. Because I think if we don't have
Yes.
that trust in our relationship with God, we do think, like you're saying, that we have to hold on to these things so tight. And that's our human nature, is
Mhm.
learning how to be willing to let go of things.
Yeah.
But that gets back to that idea of the overcommitted and the discernment with what we say yes and no to. Is
Mhm.
if we're holding on so tight to our vision of who we want to be, who we want to look like,
Mhm.
instead of a willingness to say, God has a plan for me. And, as Catholics, a lot of times we say, Jesus, I trust in you. A Polish saint who says that, Jesus, I trust in you. And you learn to say that so that you are willing to have open hands that can receive
Mhm.
what God would put there, instead of the old coin that we cling to so tight that's not worth
Yeah.
anything anyway.
Yeah.
So,
So much about that trust and allowing that love and remembering.
yes.
So, yeah, it's so interesting to come to those conclusions.
Yeah, yeah, isn't it? And it's a life process for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's what's so beautiful about, learning to know yourself more and love yourself. And then for me, through the lens of God's love for me, is that it feels like this great adventure, instead of this feeling of like, I'm a failure, I'll never get it right. Is
Yeah.
really just saying there's always some new thing that God's going to break
Mhm.
open for me and show me,
Yeah.
more that we can see and know, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It gives a big relief, like you're not alone.
Yes,
The universe wants only the best for me, and
that's right.
the
Yeah.
God of the universe. Yeah. Okay. No,
Yes. Amen.
I love those messages. Let's talk about the career and
Okay.
the family. There is for sure that pull, the desires for both, and I feel like a lot of people still have that either or,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I think, okay, this is what I love to say. I think you can do all the things. You can't
Yes.
do it all at one time. You just can't. You can't
Ah,
be a mom with kids who works, who also is the room mom, who also, you know, you
yeah.
can do all of those things, but it might not be all at one time. And it might
Mhm.
even be, you really can be a mom with kids in school who works and is the room mom. Like, you have a flexible schedule and you can do
Mhm.
it all. But if you try to do all of the things, and then you have, feedback, say you have a newborn and you're
Mhm.
still trying to be the room mom who works full time, who does, there's always a breaking point. And I think
Yeah.
this is so much a part of, again, getting back to the trusting in God, our
Mhm.
willingness to say, my identity doesn't come from the things that I do. And for me, sometimes I get in trouble because I think, well, if I don't do this, who will? And I
Mhm.
never wait to see who will. Like,
Yeah.
what if there's somebody who they really need to get to do this thing, and I'm
Uh-huh.
so busy just trying to say yes to everything just to be the person who gets the job done,
Yeah.
that I don't leave room for another woman or person, man, who really could use this opportunity. And I'm
Mhm.
talking about that more with like service. But
Mhm.
getting back to this idea of like being a working mom or being a mom who stays home, sometimes circumstances just dictate that. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm a woman with kids, but I also need to work outside the home, or I want to work outside the home. And then I talk about this more in the Make My Life Simple book, is really examining, you know, okay, well, what do I want my life to look like?
Yeah.
What does it look like now? Let's do the math on that. What are the things that are out of balance or robbing me of my peace and joy? And then being willing to either let go of some things or streamline some things, or, you know, get some things
Yeah.
in order. But that's really the heart of it, is not looking at it as this giant black or white, all or nothing, you know, I'm either doing this or I'm not. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's really this delicate back and forth, I think, where it's
The
like
dance, figuring it
the
out.
dance. That's right.
Yeah.
Is saying yes to this in this season working? Yep. Or, you know, fast forward, nope, it's not
Mm-hmm.
working anymore. And being willing to kind of assess things, I think, is just really healthy, because things do change. You know, like my whole story of working. So, I mean, when Isabel was born, she was my sixth child, and I had been doing like the blog and writing a column. And my first book came out the week before she was born. So the superhero book
Yeah.
came out on April 1st, and she was born April 7th. So it's so funny.
Yeah.
And during that season, the next few years were very intense for me. And so I didn't do anything outside of survive. I mean, I even went through a basketball season where Paul finally said, you don't need to go to all these games. You know, you don't need to drag a 3-year-old and a newborn to 4 different basketball
Oh,
games
you're
or
such a
whatever.
good mom. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would go to all these places, and I'll never forget that this was the tipping point for me. Is I was in a gym. It was the craziest thing. 2 of the boys had a game in one gym, and we were at some school that had 2 gyms. And so 2 of the boys were across the hall at the other gym. And I was trying to go back and forth to see both games.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember sitting in the bleachers, and I turned to help Isabel with something. And one of the boys made a 3-point shot, and I missed it. And I was like, I'm even here in the gym, and I missed this shot. I need to cut myself some slack, you know, like it was,
Yeah.
and I loved being there. It wasn't that it was a chore to be there,
Uh-huh.
but it was like, I just realized, you know, and it was hard for me in that season to say, I can't make it to all the games, and I hate it because I want to be there. But the bigger vocation of my sanity, and then taking care of everybody, and not just saying, you know, that I did this, is, you know, that was really key for me. So kind of had some survival mode years. And then even with that, you know, as Isabel got older and I started being invited to speak a lot, traveling for speaking, is that I really, and this gets back to this idea of like the vocation, I would look at my schedule and make sure that what it cost my family for me to be gone was not more than what they needed to pay. You know, was this peaceful for Paul? And it worked. It honestly worked great for a long time, because I would kind of go on a weekend and, you know, write the instructions, stick it on the fridge, off I went. And it was a great way to kind of start to have a bit of a career, so to speak, but to be home most of the time. But that was nothing I tried to do. And I've had women ask me, I want to be a speaker. How do I make that happen? I'm not your person for that, because I'm not a good self-marketer. I kind of like, I take opportunities.
You are.
See if the Holy Spirit, you know, like if the Holy Spirit opened the door versus I want to do this, I'm going to make it happen. But, you know, for women who are wanting to do that, I think that gets back to the idea of like, okay, say you decide you want to do this thing. You just need to be honest with yourself about where you're at and what it will cost your family. And it might cost them something, and it's a price that everybody's willing to pay. And it might be like, okay, is this really the best time for you to do this? You know? I have a friend with 8 kids, and she's going back to get her master's degree because the youngest of the 8 started kindergarten. She put that off for years, and now it is costing them something, but they know it's short term. It's just a 2-year thing, and it's worth it. But she has waited until she was in a season where it's going to work. And I want to tell you, all you younger ladies out there, I'm here to tell you this, like, you know, you blink and your kids are big, and you still have all this time. I mean, as much time as any of us has, who knows, you know, but I think it's so easy. And I know I experienced this when my boys were little, is I really felt like life was passing me by, and I thought opportunities were passing me by, and I operated out of fear. Like, what will be there for me when I'm done being home with these kids? And I'm just, like here to tell you a lot will be there for you. You know, it really will.
Yeah.
And that's not to say you don't take advantage of things that come your way if the fruit is good, if the cost to your family is not more than you guys are willing to pay. But never operate out of a sense of fear of, if I say no to this, will everything dry up?
Like
You know,
it's
if
all
I
or
don't take
nothing. Yeah.
advantage of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not an all or nothing thing. And you really just have to be willing to say, in this season right now, this is not where I'm at, you know.
Yeah.
And kind of going from there. I have a dear friend, an older woman who died a few years ago. Her name was Monique. And in that season, I call it my most drowning season ever, when Augie was, I'm sorry. The big boys were starting to get bigger, and Henry and Isabel had both been born. And so I had this like staying at home for a long time. Then those big boys got older, and we were going to have one last baby. Augie turned 5. We had one last baby. And so we had Henry. And then a couple of years later, we had Isabel, and she was a big surprise, and it was awesome, you know.
Yeah.
But I went back to, you know, I had stayed home, and then I had started to do some things outside the home, and I really enjoyed it. And then I had these 2 new babies, and it was all I could do to keep up with my middle schoolers, you know, and care for Henry and Isabel.
Yeah.
And I really was in a time where it was very difficult for me, because I really thought life was passing me by, and here I am going back into, you know, barely not drowning every day, and just kind of felt like, you know, like, what am I doing with my life? And my friend Monique gave me this paper, and it was by this woman named Catherine Doherty, and it was called The Duty of the Moment. And it's this idea of, you know, that really believing that the thing you're doing right now is the thing that God is having you do, and it's the thing that he's using to draw you closer to him, to more happiness, to more joy, more self-understanding. And all of a sudden, it was like being home with these babies and running these carpools and getting science fair projects done, which was all I could manage. You know, it wasn't like I was heroically saying no to a job. I literally could not do anything more than what was going on in my home. And all of a sudden, I saw it for what it was, which was this gift and a beautiful thing God was asking me to do, instead of a thing I was doing to bide my time until the real stuff.
Yeah.
You know. So it's just a matter of trusting, I guess, kind of in the timeline, you know, that just because I'm not doing what I want to be doing right this minute doesn't mean that it's always going to be this way.
Yeah. Oh, that I've been getting this message because I've been so impatient with my business, and I have 4 young kids, and wiser women than me have been telling me, you'll have your chance. Kids grow up.
Yes.
Don't push it, don't force it. And so reading your Overcommitted book really reminded me of that idea of the seasons and vocation, and just gave me that perspective that there is no rush.
Yes.
And I can just like take care of my family and not have this rush.
That's right. Yeah. And it's very easy to forget that, because we're in this moment, and we think, I've got to just do it now. And it's scary sometimes to say no, and it's scary. And it can be really hard too, when you look around and you see somebody who's doing the thing that you want to be doing, you know, and you're like, well, what do I have to show for my life? It's terrible. And again, it gets back to that, Jesus, I trust in you. I know you have a plan for my life. And remembering that each one of us has something totally unique. It's not like, you know, there are 5 life coach opportunities in the universe, and if I don't get one of those slots, that's it, you know. It's like, it might be that the thing that we're always doing something grand, even if it's little and just in this moment, but that, you know, these bigger hopes and dreams, they're on God's radar too. And it might be that right this minute it's not time, but it will be, and you keep doing your thing, but at the same time you don't push more than what is peaceful, what brings good fruit in your life.
Yes.
You know?
And that is why what you say is transcending through religions and everything. Yeah, it just, that makes sense. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I guess for me, I just love the pressure it takes off of me, knowing that there's a God who loves me and he's got my back, instead of it all depending on me.
Yeah.
Because I already act like that enough. And, and it's like, I need the reminder that that's not how it really is, you know?
Yeah. We almost have to mother ourselves, right? Like, right. Yeah. So I love that. So I think, let me just check my questions. I think we covered all the like the most important questions, and so we have just a couple more minutes. So I had a just personal question of how do you deal with the noise? It's just too noisy with
Yeah,
so many
that
boys.
okay. So sometimes you send them outside when you can.
Yeah.
Sometimes you turn music on. One day I felt like I realized this thing where I love to fold laundry. It's like very soothing for me, but
Yeah.
part of it's my setup. I have a laundry room with a table. It's not a big room, but it's like
Mhm.
it's laid out nicely. So I have this table where I can fold the laundry and I put it in baskets. But I like to just not be getting messed with what I'm doing. If people are in there with me, I'll do it, but it's not as relaxing.
Yeah.
And one day I realized like it was just I couldn't escape the noise of my home, and I put headphones in because I knew everybody was safe,
Mhm.
and that was beautiful. And I ended up getting all this work done because I was kind of in my own world instead of
Mhm.
feeling like I was sort of dragged into the chaos around me. But I
Mhm.
also am a big believer in having boundaries, and when it's too loud they go
Mhm.
outside. It's
Yeah.
okay to tell them
Yeah.
we don't ride. I mean, Henry loves riding a scooter through the house. For a while the boys had what are they called, ripsticks
Ripstick.
that they would
Yeah,
ride.
yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
And I loved it until one day I was like, I'm about to lose my mind. That's it. We're
Uh-huh.
done outside.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's okay. They
Yeah,
can
so okay,
handle
we
that.
do that. We send them outside in the basement and then music.
Yeah.
And then after that doesn't work, I'm like, okay, your room. Go to your room. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. But I mean, it is the reality of life with boys. It's just going to be a constant battle. That's just, they're
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
They're different.
And then one more thing, the video games. In my head, they're so evil, and I just need to let go of that idea and make it work for me somehow. How did you deal with that?
I think it's hard because I'm kind of a purist too. Like in my mind, I would rather we just didn't have them at all.
Yeah.
I think there are, again, getting back to that word boundaries. I think you need to have boundaries with it. Like boys
Mhm.
do love video games. Isabel has no interest in any of it.
Oh my
She'll play like
gosh.
a few games on my phone, but Henry has this whole, Paul brought a computer from his office so that Henry could play this one game. Well, it was Minecraft for a while.
Yeah.
So to me, there are certain ones that are not as bad as other ones, but I'm definitely one who allows my kids to. I think there are going to be some boys that struggle with it more than others. Like some boys
Mm.
just seem to have a better, you know, like threshold. Like they hit a threshold much sooner than others, and they know.
Mhm.
Like
Enough is enough.
couple of my boys are just like they're not tempted to play for hours on end, and then a couple of them are, and they just need to be aware like this is. And I'm now my guys are older, so it's a lot of it's on them.
Yeah.
Like I can't control it now. With Henry I
Yeah.
can. And when they were little, a couple of things, we put off getting a gaming system for as long as possible, and then we
Mhm.
finally got a Wii.
Mhm.
And I definitely think when you can have it in a way that's more of a group activity so that
Yeah.
they're not isolated, I don't
Mm.
think that's like across the board negative thing. They're having
Mhm.
fun. Like my big boys still get together and play video games, um, and it's this group thing, and they just have a
Yeah.
blast doing it. Versus the thing I'm very, I this is a hill that I think parents should die on, which is phones when your kids are too young, and
Yeah.
letting children be alone in their room with devices
Yeah,
is
that's a
just
no. Yeah.
a bad plan.
So
So
what's the minimum age for your kids to
well,
get the
because my
phone?
kids go to such a small school, we can get away, and it's like less than a mile from our house, and we know everybody that it's almost like a homeschool, but it's brick and mortar.
Okay.
They can get away with having a phone later. I do have friends whose kids go to bigger schools, public schools, and I absolutely, or if the parents are divorced, I totally understand the kids getting a phone,
Right.
even as young as 6th or 7th grade. For us, we were able to put it off till 9th grade.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Um,
delaying it as much as possible.
I
Yeah.
think you should, as long as you're in a place where it's working peacefully, there's no need for them to have a
Yeah.
phone until they really get to a point where they're away from you and you have to be able to get in touch with them, or they have a job. Definitely by the time they're driving, I think they should have a phone with them.
Yeah.
So I don't,
Yeah. For
and I have a
safety.
friend who said she waited till her oldest son was 18 to get him a phone. And she did not do that with the second son because she felt like that was, that they didn't do that right. Because by the time the kid got the phone, they were no longer, as the parents, in a position to really guide him and how to use it properly.
Ah.
And so it's like waiting until they're 18 seems like some kind of ideal, like a heroic thing. Like we didn't give our kid a phone until he was 18, but then he's on his own and he's
Yeah.
never had any time under your
That's true.
guidance
Yeah.
to learn how to manage time on the phone,
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to
So
be there.
yes.
Well, yes. Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And everyone needs to go check out your book, Overcommitted. And I will share with you all the other books that Rachel has written. But for now, thank you, Rachel. I'm just going to stop the recording. And is there anything else you want to say, Rachel? Sorry, where can...
And you can do an intro for me. We never did that, but you can just do it and just tell people where to find me. Like my blog is testosterone.net, or I could do it really quick.
Sure,
Whatever's easier for you.
yes. Actually, I just checked out your testosterone and it didn't work. Yeah.
It didn't work?
No, but then the Rachel Balducci site worked.
Okay, I know. I think I let something lapse with the blog, and I honestly I'll just have to look into it. I got some kind of like URL update, and I didn't have time to deal with it, which is probably as much of a, an indication of where I'm at. It's like the blog.
It doesn't have to be perfect, right? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, for sure. But they can definitely find me on Instagram and Twitter.
Yes, that's where I find you. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where we can see you folding laundry and
dancing,
and all the fun things. Yeah.
Singing into butter with my daughter. Yeah, all that good stuff.
Okay.